Story 1. The first thing that bothered me about the place was the smell. It wasn't strong, and it wasn't something most people would notice right away. But it was there the moment we stepped inside, faint and stale, like old paper mixed with something slightly sour, hiding underneath the air fresheners. My wife Laura noticed it too because I saw her wrinkle her nose slightly as we walked into the lobby, though neither of us said anything at first. We had driven almost 3 hours to get there after finding the place online. According to the website, it was supposed to be a historical attraction, an old psychiatric institute that had been converted into a museum where visitors could learn about the history of mental health treatment in the United States. The photos on the website looked interesting enough that I thought it would make a good day trip. Quiet museums are the kind of places I usually enjoy, and our daughter Eva, who was 9 at the time, liked the idea of exploring somewhere strange and mysterious. The building itself appeared at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by trees, and it looked far larger than the photos had suggested. Tall grey stone walls with narrow windows made the entire structure feel more like an active hospital than a museum that simply preserved history. There was a wooden sign outside that read, "Hillhaven Historical Institute Tours Daily," and there were parking spaces marked in front of the entrance, which made everything look legitimate enough that none of us questioned it. Inside the lobby, the air felt strangely still. A woman sat behind the reception desk with her hair pulled back so tightly that it almost looked painful, and instead of greeting us, she simply slid a clipboard across the counter without saying a word. "Sign the visitor form," she said, eventually. I didn't read it carefully. Most museums require some kind of liability waiver, so I signed my name automatically and passed the clipboard to Laura, who signed right below me, while Eva drew a little smiley face where her name should have gone. The woman didn't react to that either. She just took the clipboard and placed it inside a drawer, as if she had done the same motion thousands of times before. "Tour starts in 5 minutes," she said. Then she looked at Eva in a way that made something inside my stomach tighten slightly. "Children are rare visitors here," she added quietly. That should probably have been the moment we left, but nothing about the situation felt alarming enough to justify turning around. A few minutes later, a man wearing a dark polo shirt with the museum logo walked into the lobby and introduced himself as our guide. His name was Daniel, and he looked younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with tired eyes and the kind of nervous smile someone gives when they are trying too hard to appear relaxed. "Good afternoon, folks," he said. "Looks like it's just the 3 of you today. Private tour." He said it like it was a good thing, but something about his voice sounded slightly strained. He led us down a long hallway where the floors were covered in faded linoleum and the walls displayed framed black and white photographs of patients and doctors from decades ago. The institute opened in 1922, he explained. At the time, it was considered one of the most advanced psychiatric treatment facilities in the region. End quote. Some of the treatments may seem unusual by today's standards, but they represented the cutting edge of medical science at the time. Eva asked questions constantly, because that's what kids do when they're curious about something. "Did people live here?" she asked. "Yes," Daniel said, "for many years." "Did they get better?" she asked. "Sometimes," he answered quietly. As we continued through the building, Laura stopped in one of the waiting rooms, where a small table held several magazines. "These aren't exhibits," she said. "They're just old magazines." One of them had a date on the cover from more than 30 years ago. Daniel froze for a moment when she pointed it out, and then forced a small smile. "Some parts of the building haven't been updated in a while," he said. That answer didn't make much sense, but the tour continued. We walked through several wings that displayed old equipment behind glass cases, restraint devices, hydrotherapy tubs, and treatment charts from patients who had once lived there. The deeper we moved into the building, the more something began to feel wrong. It wasn't dramatic, just small things. Doors quietly locking behind us. Security cameras mounted in corners that didn't match the supposed museum theme. Hallways that all looked the same. Eventually, Daniel led us into a large circular room that contained nothing but chairs arranged in a perfect ring. This room, he said quietly, was used for group therapy sessions. Eva walked into the center of the circle and spun slowly, looking at the chairs. "Why are they still here?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer her question. Instead, he looked directly at me with an expression that had completely changed from the nervous smile he had earlier. "You signed the forms," he said. I frowned. "What forms?" "The intake forms," he replied. Laura laughed nervously beside me. "You mean the visitor waiver?" Daniel slowly shook his head. "No, admission forms." For a moment, the words didn't make sense. Then the door behind us opened, and 3 people entered the room wearing white medical coats. One of them held a tablet device and began reading from it like he was reviewing patient records. "Mr. Alvarez," he said calmly, looking directly at me, "documented anxiety disorder with recurring panic episodes over the last 3 years. Mrs. Alvarez," he continued, glancing at Laura, "chronic stress symptoms and untreated anxiety." My stomach dropped. "That's not possible," I said. The doctor looked up from the tablet. "You're safe here," he said. "We're here to help you." Laura grabbed my arm tightly. "This isn't funny," she whispered. "This isn't a museum." The woman doctor standing beside him smiled gently. "No," she said. "It never was." In that moment, every strange detail from the last hour suddenly made sense, all at once. The smell in the entrance hall, the magazines that weren't exhibits, the cameras in the corners, the doors locking behind us. Daniel spoke quietly from behind us. "I tried to warn you," he said, "but by then it was already too late because the doors had locked and the tour was over." We were separated within minutes. Staff members appeared from other hallways and began escorting us in different directions, while calmly explaining that we were entering an evaluation period required by state law. I remember Laura shouting my name as they led her away down another corridor, and Eva crying while a nurse tried to reassure her that everything was going to be okay. They placed me in a small room with a bed bolted to the floor and a narrow window covered with decorative metal bars that were clearly designed to look less like a prison cell. A doctor arrived shortly after with a tablet and began explaining that our family had been identified as needing intervention. According to him, I had contacted the institute months earlier, asking about family therapy options, and the visit had simply been the first step in our treatment process. I told him that was impossible. He calmly informed me that everything was documented and that my denial was a normal symptom of the condition they were treating. Over the next few days, the routines began. Medication in the morning, group therapy sessions, evaluations, meetings with doctors who all agreed that our family dynamic required extended treatment. Every time I insisted that we had come there as tourists, they wrote something on their tablets and nodded as if my insistence only confirmed their diagnosis. Weeks passed, or maybe months. Time became difficult to track once the medication started affecting my memory. Laura eventually stopped arguing and began cooperating with the therapists because she believed that was the fastest way to get us out. Eva adapted even faster. Children always do. She made friends with other kids whose families lived in the building and started attending art classes, and supervised activities like this had always been her normal life. One afternoon, while walking through the garden area during recreation time, I saw Daniel again. He was leading another family across the courtyard while explaining the history of the institute in the exact same calm voice he had used with us. When our eyes met for a moment, I saw the same expression of quiet desperation I remembered from that first day. He looked like someone who had tried to warn too many people and failed, every time. The family he was guiding looked curious and relaxed, completely unaware that the doors behind them would soon lock, just like they had for us. That was the moment I understood the real purpose of the tours. The institute didn't advertise itself as a hospital. It presented itself as a museum, so families would walk in willingly and sign the paperwork without reading it carefully. Once the forms were signed, everything that followed could be documented as voluntary treatment. Months later, the doctors told me I was making excellent progress. My resistance had decreased. My acceptance of the treatment process showed improved insight into my condition. Sometimes late at night, I still try to remember the exact moment we should have left. The smell in the lobby, the clipboard on the desk, the guide's nervous voice. Any of those could have been the moment we turned around and walked back outside. But we didn't. And now, when new visitors arrive and Daniel begins another tour through the building, I sometimes watch from the window of the recreation room and wonder how many of them will still remember the day they came here. Because eventually, the medication works. Eventually, the routines make sense. Eventually, the idea that this place was ever anything other than a hospital begins to feel like a strange misunderstanding. And that is the real reason nobody ever escapes Hillhaven. Not because the doors are locked, but because after enough time, you stop remembering that they were ever supposed to open. Story 2. The first envelope appeared on a Tuesday morning, and I remember that detail because nothing unusual ever happened in the neighborhood where I lived. My name is Adrian Torres, and for almost 15 years, my life had followed the same dull routine with such perfect regularity that even small changes stood out in my mind, like stains on white fabric. I worked from home doing bookkeeping for small businesses, rarely left the house except for groceries, and spoke to almost no one beyond the people who lived on my street. It was one of those suburbs where every lawn was trimmed, every driveway held the same kind of family car, and every person nodded politely without ever wanting to know anything real about anyone else. That morning, I opened my front door to collect the mail and found a plain brown envelope lying neatly on the welcome mat. There was no stamp, no return address, no sign that it had gone through any normal delivery process. Just my name, written across the front in clean black letters. I thought at first it was a mistake from a neighbor, maybe something dropped off at the wrong house. But when I picked it up, I felt something inside that was heavier than a letter should have been. I opened it in the kitchen and found a photograph. It showed a young woman standing beside a gas pump at night, under the hard white glow of a station light. The image was grainy, taken from a distance, and there was something about the angle that made it feel wrong, as if the person who took it had been hiding while they watched her. On the back, someone had written a name, Sophia Marin. Underneath the name was a date from 3 months earlier, and beneath that, 2 words in red ink, last seen. I didn't know the woman. I didn't understand why someone would leave that at my house. I searched her name online, mostly out of curiosity, and found the story almost immediately. She had disappeared 3 months earlier while driving home from work in a town nearly 200 miles away. The police had released a statement saying the last confirmed sighting of her came from a gas station security camera. They had never found her car. The case was still open. I remember looking from the news article on my laptop back to the photograph on the table and feeling the first faint tremor of something I could not yet name. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was the sense that a locked door somewhere in my life had just been nudged open a fraction of an inch. The next morning, there was another envelope. This one contained 2 photographs, different people, different names, different dates, same red words on the back, last seen. By the 3rd morning, there were 4 more. I spent hours comparing the names to missing person reports online, and every single one matched a real case. The dates lined up, the faces lined up, the details lined up. But the photographs themselves were not images I could find published anywhere. They looked private. They looked recent. They looked like someone had been standing close enough to watch these people during the final, ordinary minutes of their lives. After a week, I had 12 envelopes stacked on my kitchen table and a headache that never seemed to fully go away. I took the photographs to the police station because I no longer had any other idea what to do. The officer who met with me was polite in the careful way people are polite to someone they suspect might be unstable. He asked if I had enemies. He asked if anyone had threatened me. He asked if I knew any of the people in the images. I told him no. He took the photographs for examination and said detectives would coordinate with the agencies handling the missing persons cases. For 3 days after that, no new envelopes appeared, and I almost convinced myself it had ended. Then the pattern changed. On Friday morning, I opened my door and found a white envelope instead of a brown one. Inside was a single photograph of the elderly man who lived across the street, walking his dog at dawn. His name was Ricardo Alvarez. On the back, in the same black lettering, someone had written his name, and beneath it, the red words I had begun to hate. Last seen. I stood there, staring at the picture, until I realized my own heartbeat had become loud enough to hear. Ricardo followed the same routine every morning. He left his house just after 6:30, walked the dog to the end of the block and back, then drank coffee by the front window before leaving for work. I looked across the street and saw his curtains still drawn. That alone meant nothing, but I called his house anyway. No answer. Around noon, 2 police cars arrived. I watched from my living room as officers spoke to his wife on the lawn. She covered her mouth with both hands and then sat down hard on the front steps. Ricardo had never made it to work that day. His car was later found unlocked in a supermarket parking lot 3 miles away. His wallet was in the cup holder. His phone was gone. No witnesses. No signs of a struggle. I showed the officers the photograph, and one of them looked at me for a long time before taking it from my hand. After that, the investigators stopped treating me like an eccentric man who had gotten caught in some stupid prank. They came into my house. They photographed the envelopes. They dusted the porch and the mailbox and even the kitchen table. They installed a camera facing my front steps. One of the detectives told me quietly that if the person sending those photographs knew these people before they disappeared, then they might also know who would be next. That sentence stayed with me all night. The next envelope came 2 days later. It contained a picture of a woman named Daniela Ruiz pushing a stroller through the neighborhood park near my house. I recognized her immediately because she had moved onto the next street over with her husband and their baby less than a year earlier. She was still new enough that people smiled too brightly when they passed her. I didn't call the police first that time. I took the photograph and drove straight to her house. Her husband answered the door in a wrinkled t-shirt, confused and annoyed, until I showed him the picture. He stared at it for several seconds and then told me they had left that morning to visit relatives out of state. He said the photograph had to be from the day before because Daniela had worn that same coat to the park on Sunday. I remember the wave of relief that hit me then. Maybe the pattern had broken. Maybe she was safe because I had gotten there in time. 2 days later, the police informed me that Daniela, her husband, and their baby had never reached their destination. Their car had been found empty on the shoulder of a highway 40 miles south of where it should have been. No blood, no broken glass, no indication of where any of them had gone. After that, I stopped sleeping properly. Every noise outside the house made me sit up in bed. Every headlight that passed across my curtains made my chest lock tight for a few seconds. I began checking the porch before opening the door in the mornings because part of me already knew there would be another envelope waiting. There always was. A teenage cashier from the pharmacy on Maple Street. A man who worked nights at the car wash near the interstate. A retired school teacher who fed birds in her backyard every afternoon. Every one of them disappeared within days. The detectives began stationing an unmarked car down the block overnight, but it didn't help. The camera they installed on my porch captured nothing useful. There would simply be no envelope on the mat one moment, and then one would be there the next. No approach, no departure, just absence turning into presence between frames, like some part of the recording had been quietly lifted out. That was when the case began spreading beyond me. Local news picked up the disappearances, and for a while, my house became the center of a kind of nervous curiosity. Reporters parked outside. Neighbors whispered. People slowed their cars when they passed my street. The detectives told me not to speak publicly, but I could feel something changing in the neighborhood. The old comfortable rhythm of the place had been disturbed. People started bringing their children inside before dark. Porch lights stayed on all night. More than once, I looked out the window and saw neighbors staring toward my house with the same guarded expression people use when they suspect danger, but have not yet decided whether it is contagious. Then, one night, I saw the person who had been leaving the envelopes. I woke a little after 3 in the morning with the distinct feeling that someone was standing outside the front door. It wasn't a sound that woke me. It was certainty. I crossed the dark hallway and looked through the narrow side window beside the entrance. A figure stood on the porch, holding an envelope in one hand. They wore a dark coat with the collar raised, and I could not make out the face because the porch light was off and the shape of the body was turned slightly away from me. They bent, placed the envelope on the mat, and straightened with calm, unhurried movements that were somehow more terrifying than any sign of panic would have been. I yanked the door open immediately. The porch was empty. The street beyond it was empty. No running footsteps, no slamming gate, no engine starting. Whoever had been there was simply gone. The envelope remained at my feet. My hands shook so badly, I tore the edge while opening it. Inside was a photograph of my own house, taken from across the street at dusk. Through the front window, I could see myself sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open and one hand pressed against my forehead, exactly the way I sat when the headaches became unbearable. On the back of the photograph was my name, Adrian Torres. Beneath it, in red, last seen. I didn't go back to sleep. Got. I didn't go back. Got. I sat in the living room until sunrise, with every light on in the house, and the photograph face down on the coffee table, because I could not bear to keep looking at it. When the detectives arrived that morning, they took the image and immediately moved me to a motel outside town under temporary protective watch. They said it was precautionary. They said whoever was behind this had escalated by targeting me directly. They said they didn't know whether the message was a threat or some kind of taunt. What they did not say, but what I could see on every face in that room, was that none of them had any idea how to stop it. 2 officers watched the motel hallway in shifts. Another sat in the parking lot. I was told not to leave the room except to speak with investigators. By the second night, I felt less protected than contained. There is a point where police presence stops feeling like safety and starts feeling like confirmation that something is close. Around midnight, I heard a soft knock on the room door. Not urgent, not repeated. Just 3 deliberate taps. I froze. The officers had instructions to announce themselves before knocking. I called out, asking who it was, and got no answer. After a few seconds, I looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. On the carpet, directly in front of the door, lay another envelope. I waited until the officers upstairs came down before opening it. The photograph inside showed the motel room itself, taken from outside the window. I was visible through the gap in the curtains, standing beside the lamp, with the phone in my hand. On the back, there was no name, this time. Just a sentence, written in black ink. You were never the next one. The detective beside me read it once and then again. No one spoke for several seconds. I remember that silence more clearly than anything else, because in that instant, the entire shape of the horror changed. Until then, I had believed the envelopes were warnings about future victims. That sentence suggested something much worse. I was not being warned. I was being shown. Shown each disappearance as it happened. Shown each person at the edge of the moment before they were taken. And if I was never the next one, then that meant I had some other role in it, some purpose I still did not understand. The answer came the following morning when the police searched my house again, from top to bottom. One of the crime scene technicians discovered a narrow access panel inside the hall closet, behind a stack of old paint cans left by the previous owner. The panel opened into a crawl space that ran between the walls and extended farther than the floor plan of the house should have allowed. Hidden there were dozens of photographs, hundreds maybe. Some were the same images I had received in envelopes. Others were older, much older. Faces from missing person reports going back years. People from other states, other towns, other decades. Some of the photographs showed victims standing outside my house. Some showed them inside it, sitting where I sat, sleeping in the guest room, looking out my windows with the same distant, distracted expression of people who believed they were alone. The crawl space also contained notebooks, meticulous records, dates, addresses, names, times, and scattered through all of it over and over again, like a refrain, was one sentence written in the same careful hand. He watches them better when they think it is his home. I found out later that the man who had owned the house before me had disappeared 6 months before I moved in. The sale had gone through a bank after the property sat vacant during probate complications. There had been no family, no one to ask questions, no one to say the floor plan looked wrong or the walls sounded hollow in certain places. For 15 years, I had been living inside someone else's hunting blind. The envelopes had not been meant to threaten me. They had been invitations, messages from whoever came after him, or maybe from the one who had never really left. Messages reminding me that I had been part of it all along, simply by staying there, sleeping there, giving the place the appearance of an ordinary life, while people were watched from inside the walls. The police moved me again after that. New location, new officers, new procedures. They told me the house was being sealed and processed as a major crime scene. They told me I was not a suspect. They told me none of this was my fault. But even now, I still wake up at night with the feeling that someone is standing just beyond the door, not trying to get in, only waiting. A few weeks after they tore open the walls of the house and filled trucks with evidence, An envelope arrived at the apartment, where they had relocated me under a different name. No one saw who delivered it. No camera caught anyone entering the hallway. Inside was a single photograph of an empty room. It took me several seconds to realize what I was looking at. It was the crawl space from my old house after the police had cleaned it out. Bare wood, dust, no photographs, no notebooks, no records. On the back, there were only 4 words. Still plenty of other houses. Closing. Those were 3 disturbing stories about people who vanished without leaving a trace. Stories about houses that watch, photographs that arrive too early, and places where the wrong person ends up at the wrong moment. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't what happens. It's realizing someone knew it would happen before anyone else did. If you enjoyed these stories tonight, consider subscribing to the channel and joining us for more unsettling stories like these. And tell me in the comments, which story disturbed you the most?